This morning is taken from the Gospel of Matthew at chapter 28, verses 16 through 20. Matthew 28, verses 16 through 20. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." This is the word of the Lord. Would you pray with me, please? Almighty and everlasting God, speak to us now with words that are in keeping with your will for our lives. We want to see Jesus, O God. We want to follow more closely behind him. We want to hold more tightly to his hand. We want to be more faithful, more committed disciples of his love and companionship and justice-making. And so in these moments that the transformation we seek might begin or continue or at last become complete in us, let me hide behind your cross. Let your words go forth, and may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together be acceptable in your sight, O you who are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Go, therefore, and make disciples. Go, therefore, and make disciples. It's not a suggestion. In the Gospel of Matthew, it's the last commandment Jesus gives us before he promises that he will empower us to do the very thing he is instructing us to do. Go, make disciples. In Christianity, the word disciple primarily refers to a dedicated follower of Jesus. In the ancient world, a disciple was a follower or an adherent of a particular teacher. A disciple in the ancient biblical world actively imitated both the life and the teaching of the master, the life and the teaching of the master. And a pastor named Stan Smith, who I was reading this week, has put it this way, probably a lot simpler. A true disciple of Jesus is not just a student or a learner, but a follower, one who applies what he has learned. Thus, a true disciple will ask, what would Jesus do? I was reading a commentary the other day that disciples do not live for themselves. And it said that that was never Jesus' intention, that we would live for ourselves. Instead, Jesus' command to go make disciples had as its purpose the formation of a worldwide community of Jews and Gentiles that would be about the business of living out Jesus' teachings. It was to be an alternative community with commitments and practices that were antithetical to Rome's values and practices. The cornerstone of this new community were to be compassion and healing and mercy and inclusiveness. Compassion, healing, mercy, and inclusiveness were to breathe life into a society that had already been built on militarism and lies and hostility and oppression. Go make disciples of all nations was a battle cry to turn the world on its ear and finally bring the reign of God into being. But there is a question I would like for us to reflect upon. I'd like us to think about it while we're watching television and watching the news and drawing assumptions and making judgments about demonstrators and demonstrations. I want us to think about this question while we are wishing peaceful protesters would just go home and not disturb us with demands for liberty and justice for all. And here is the question I want us to consider deep down in the core of our being. Here is the question. Can one make disciples of Jesus if one is not first a disciple of Jesus? And here is another question to go alongside it. Can one build an alternative community that is at its core antithetical to Rome's values and practices when one is content with Rome's values and practices? Not everyone has the luxury of being content with Rome's practices. A friend of mine who is black from an African country, a female pastor who pastors here in the United States, posted something on Facebook last week that had deep resonance for me. She gave me permission to share it with you. I might wind up reading it exactly as it's written, even though the language is a little rough, so if that bothers you, you might want to turn down the volume of your television or send your children out of the room. This is what she has to say. I want to first say I have always been a pastor to police officers. My current church is the first church I have pastored where I don't have police officers in my congregation. I am a good pastor to officers. They have loved me and I have loved them. In Brown Deer, I had taken the course and served as a beloved police chaplain. The encounters with police are the more difficult because I often see past the uniform to the human being. So, she writes, "Beloved black siblings, is it only me, or are you two finding yourself reminded and reliving all the ugly past encounters with racism? Is it personally harder for you this week than last week?" She calls the name of a particular church community and she says, "Do you remember that time I was stopped by police on my way from church at 11 p.m. and was told to lie on the ground, and when I tried to explain I was the pastor, the officer screamed, 'Shut the fuck up'? Thankfully, the church council chair drove by and stopped and called my name." She calls the name of another church community and says, "Do you remember that time when I was in the church's parking lot and the police arrived looking for some teenager they thought was endangered and had been spotted in our parking lot? And I said to the officer, 'Sir, how can I?' only to be cut short with the scream, 'Shut the fuck up'?" And she goes on, Sarah, do you remember the time I was so concerned about the veteran with PTSD who had waved a rifle and had a personal vendetta and had threatened to shoot up the church on that Sunday morning? And I called the police that Saturday evening to request they ride by the church often on that Sunday morning. And the 2 police officers had come to my home to get more information, and right there, standing in my kitchen, the officer had asked, "How did you get this job? You sound foreign. Do you have papers?" And then the other officer had said to me, "If the man you're talking about is a veteran, it's very respectful for immigrants like you to show disrespect." So I said, "Officer," and she interrupted me with a growl to shut the F up. Son was sitting at the top of the stairs the entire time. When they left, he said he had been recording the whole thing because he was afraid that they would shoot me. And I said, "Nobody gets shot by police in their own home." And we were so shook up, I didn't know what to do, so I called Carol just to have someone to talk it through. "Carol, you were great, especially wanting to march out to the police station right there and then." I had safely locked away these and other encounters in a bunker in my soul. Now these memories have gone amok and are looting my heart. The memories are setting my inner life aflame. God's city in me is burning up. I can't breathe. I originally inserted this story in my sermon because it seems a safer way of making a point to you than telling you about me. But now that I have told you some of my friend's story, I feel I do need to tell you about me. Last week and the week before, I spent some time driving to members' houses to drop off an upper room and just lay eyes on people that I haven't seen in weeks and weeks. I went to one particular member's house and rang the front doorbell, and no one answered, so I was taking the upper room back to my car to write a note on it with the intention of sticking it in the door and leaving. And a member of the family came to an upstairs window and asked me kind of roughly, "Can I help you?" I said, "I'm Pastor B. Is so-and-so home?" And she said, "No." And it was a little nasty. I held up the upper room and said, "I have an upper room for her. I'd like to leave it." And the family member pointed around the side of the house, and I don't remember if she said or if she just gave me to understand that this was the door that I really wanted. And so I walked around the side of the house and I rang that doorbell. And I stepped back because it was a small vestibule and I wanted to be safely social distance. And the member didn't come to the door, so I opened the screen and I stuck the upper room inside and pushed the screen door so that it stayed stuck so that she would see it whenever she did come to the door. And I didn't think anything of it, and I walked away and I got in my car. Well, no sooner was I pulling out of the street than a police car was rushing toward me with his lights on, but his siren off. And I don't know if you know, but that means that they're trying to surprise somebody in the act of something. But when I saw the lights, I pulled over because I saw the lights of a police car rushing to some emergency. Well, imagine my surprise when he pulled over on his side of the street and glared at me. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I nearly burst out crying. Because it doesn't matter how much education you have. And it doesn't matter how well employed you are. And it doesn't really matter if you're not doing anything wrong. All that matters is that somebody can identify you as not belonging, and your life is in danger. So he continued to glare at me, and he stuck his hand out of the window and he waved on the cars behind him that had stopped. And since he hadn't made a move toward me, I started to slowly drive away, and he let me. He did make a U-turn, but he didn't follow me. And nearly in tears, I called Fred and I told him what had happened. And he said, this probably isn't a good time to surprise people at their houses. And I said, well, I have one more stop to make before I'm heading home. And he said, do me a favor, just call. Call and say you're coming. Go, make disciples. It is our command, and it is essential. The world needs to be transformed so that when we look in each other's eyes, when we look on each other's faces, we see people. Go make disciples. Heart by heart, person by person, community by community. Go make disciples. Will you be the transformative presence that the world so needs? Will you heed the voice of the one you say you follow and follow him till the end? Will you be that force for change that brings about justice and mercy for all God's children, all God's children? Maybe it's a lot to ask, or maybe you don't know where to start. Let me read you something before I take my seat. May it be a beginning for those who don't know where to begin. It says, your black friend is trying to be okay. Your black friend in the past 30 days has watched a black man get shot while jogging, a black woman get shot dead while sleeping, and the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. Your black friend has also listened to the President of the United States use segregationist words as a veiled threat. Your black friend is trying to be okay. Please don't ask us about the looting. Please don't chastise us about the rioting. Please don't tell us that all lives matter. Please don't minimalize our fear. Please don't bring up black on black crime. Please don't say, what about Chicago? Please don't say, if you just act like a wildly successful person, usually Oprah, Obama, Colin Powell, Denzel, or Will Smith. Please don't judge us. Your black friend is trying to be okay. Listen to your black friend. Empathize with your black friend. Support your black friend. Pray for your black friend. Pray with your black friend. Just let your black friend know that you really care. Your black friend will remember who truly had their back during this difficult time. They will remember who was more concerned about a looted Target. They will remember you posting a thinly veiled and racially offensive meme. They will remember you calling looters savages. They will remember your silence about their black life and the black lives of others. It's real easy. Do whatever you can to help your black friend out, because your black friend is trying to be okay. Let anyone who has ears to hear, hear. Amen.